there's that issue as well. And the question is whether or not this is a reliable measure. Again, remember the definition from the last chapter. It's, does it measure the same thing consistently in all circumstances? Not clear that it does. So Jeffrey Shinska and Kimberly Tanner, two educational psychologists, talked about biases and inconsistencies that influence grading. They wrote about some of those factors we just mentioned. The educational psychologist W.C. Eales studied the consistency of teachers' grading by asking 61 teachers to grade the same history and geography papers twice. The second time was 11 weeks after the first. He concluded that, quote, variability of grading is about as great as in the same individual as in groups of different individuals. So after analysis of reliability coefficients, arguments of scores amounted to little better than sheer guesses. Factors that occasionally influence the grade can be the penmanship of the author, the sex of the author, ethnicity of the author, level of experience of the instructor, order in which papers are reviewed, and even the attractiveness of the author. I think I mentioned in a previous discussion about that thing at CIA about everyone turning up the same soup. The good-looking girls in class got higher grades on it, but it was all from the same pot, so it was the same soup. So things like that. So this is happening here as well. And we can, of course, in terms of broad strokes, we can say, okay, we know A papers are better than B papers, but then it's a question of how much and why. So you have some thoughts and ideas on that?
Yeah. The first one with suspect that a lot of the people who are most educated people, the most highly schooled people, come out and think that the world is organized and based on unfair systems of comparison, saying, oh, it's unfair to treat me in this way and not take account of me as an individual and my background. And they've been in K through 12, they've been in at least 4 years of undergraduate, or sometimes even the postgrad. So it's not too surprising that some people will go through this system that we see is, in many cases, biased and unfair, and project that onto the world because their lived experience might possibly seeing the subconscious bias and unfairness that does exist in these institutions of higher learning. So that's kind of informed how they look at the rest of the world. Whereas there could be some people who don't go that route, who just go to a trade school and it's like, hey, can you actually do the thing? Like at the end of the day, the person who's rating you is like, does that engine of that car work? Did you complete the fix in that engine in that car under the 30 minutes? Like I can look at your engine, look at this other person's engine, look at that other person's engine. They're all the same. So everybody passes. So for those people, they go from a lived experience where they're like, no, it doesn't matter how we came to do it. It doesn't matter what language I was using, the methods I used to actually fix it, what my skin color is, what my background is. At the end of the day, did I fix the engine? So they might be informed with something where they don't understand that these other people have been in a system where there's so much subjectivity into their grading, into their worth, into their system of worth. And that is a thing that's actually put there. Oh, I have a GPA. Oh, I'm valedictorian. Oh, I'm this and that. Oh, I graduated cum laude, or that's a thing. Something cum
Magna
laude?
cum laude.
Magna cum laude. That's a thing.
Yeah.
Okay, so they have that kind of thing. The people with the degrees on their walls and things like this. It's something to signify status, and we are social animals and we seek status. So for some groups of people, they might tie status to something that is very subjective, which is happening in your institutions of higher learning versus if you go to trade schools, if you go out there and just get into the market, it is more based off of objective merit. So people might have a different idea of what actually the world judges. Is that something you think might be informing some of these people?
I think so. Well, I was going to get into for a sec to sort of an anecdote, but it applies, is that the bias thing goes both ways. Because I remember, for example, my sister turned in this essay and she got a bad grade on it. And my mother said, like, oh, it was a really good essay. I don't know why. But that's tough because either way, there could be a bias. It could have been a well-done essay, but the teacher may not have liked something she talked about. But then the other thing is, well, people are going to be more favorable towards their kids, like the parents who always say, my kids are good looking, when you know that's not the case. So the bias can skew either way. That's why it's a little tough to sit here and say, oh, yes, this is objectively good. Because, again, it's like, like I think Tom Woods was talking about some dissertations even that like have actually been pretty weak, but if they conform to certain views, they get the top mark right away. Whereas other things, if you write something that's dissenting, you have to really go above and beyond because you have to work harder to make your case. So
Yes.
I think that plays into it as well. But then, like in Gad Sad's book, he talked about biases in academia. And he talks about a number of professors said they would punish people who had dissenting views. Like they were asked and they said openly, yeah, we would. So you have to factor that in as well. It's like they talk about pre-civil rights era. Oh, this person's black. They commit a crime. They're going to be guilty no matter what. White jury, all that. It's not, obviously it's not that extreme, but it's a similar idea of, okay, the bias is against them immediately. Yeah.
Yes, and we have prejudices. I have biases. I have prejudices on certain things. I try to identify them and account for them. Some of them I think are for good reasons. Some might be for worse reasons. Of course, if some are for good, then that means others by definition are for worse. But I'm not going to claim that I'm against them. I have actually a mistrust. I was just watching something Viva Frey and Robert Barnes. They do this vlog thing where they just talk about different things. And Robert Barnes is a lawyer. He's a very successful lawyer, and he was talking about when he's going through and picking juries, he's actually a lot more suspicious, or actually won't accept in some cases a juror that comes in and says, "I have no bias." He prefers the one to come in and say, "Okay, I'm biased towards this, but in this case, I haven't gotten this information." And then he can be like, "Okay, now that I know what to look for with this person, I can see if they apply," because the people who are saying they have no bias are just kind of pretending. That's why I don't even go as far as be like, "Oh, I don't see race." No, I have eyes. I can see skin colors. I can see variations. I see those. Like I'm not blind to height. I'm not blind to weight. I'm not deaf to accents. It's many things. If I'm walking around in an area where I've gone to other countries where I don't speak the language, and I hear somebody speak English, I'll hear that, and that will give me some kind of tinge of like, oh, that's somebody who I can communicate with in a better way. Like that's there. To pretend that doesn't exist is BS. But then if I hear the person with English is running at me with a knife, and then everybody else who's speaking a different language is saying, come, we'll protect you. I'm not like, well, that guy has a knife and he speaks English, so I'm going to go to that guy. When it gets to that point, I don't have the bias in that kind of sense. Okay.
Well, and I think I'm sorry, you had one more point?
No, go ahead.
I was just going to sort of comment on that. I've sort of changed on that too, because I used to have that attitude of like, I try to be objective. I try not to be biased, but look, we're all biased. I mean, there are certain people I'm favorable towards. There are certain people that if they get criticized, I'm going to be more defensive of them. I admit that. Now, if the criticisms are valid, if they can be proved, I try and take that into consideration. I always say, like, any of the people I like, I don't worship any of these people. You can criticize them. My problem is if I find out the criticisms are false or based on misrepresentations or something like that. Like, I was reading Phil Magness's critique of Nancy McLean's books, and some of the stuff she said about certain people, how there were leaps of logic. She made connections that weren't there. She even cites certain sources but claimed the opposite of what the sources said. Things like that. That's where I just become really disgusted, because you're deliberately lying to push a certain agenda. Again, you can criticize any of these people, but if it's not based on factual information, that's where I take issue.
Yeah, and that's one of my one of the things I'm worried about when you look at this kind of industrial schooling type of environment, where it's very selfish for you to expect anybody else to care as much about your children as you do about them.
Yeah.
And let alone to have people be forced to care about them. So if you have a teacher, even if that teacher is well-meaning, let's say that teacher has a kid, and that teacher is told like, okay, you have to teach these children this information, and that teacher understands that that's their job. That's putting money on the plates of the kids. Even if that teacher disagrees with that information, some of the information they're being told to teach their children, and it's their main source of income, and they will care more about their children. So they might just find a way to just rationalize and say, okay, it doesn't matter. I'm just going to teach the kids this because it's still a situation where my kids need to have food on their table. Like, I'm just going to pass these kids. I'm not going to be that critical about the things they're doing and things like that, because if I get a lower kind of, if they have a lower GPA, if I don't have a high enough pass-fail ratio, I'll lose my job and then I'll get in a bad situation. So I'm not really going to report on these kids. I'm not really going to be that concerned. Let's just get them through the system, because they're doing that because they're mostly concerned about their kid at home. That's the kind of thing where I'm saying there could be some negative things that just occur due to the way the system is set up that could be affected and actually dealt with, versus even the best meaning people will actually be in that situation. Whereas if you find a situation where there's more individualized teaching, where the parents are as much responsible or have more control and involvement in their kids' actual learning, that's one way to control for the biases as much as possible, where it's like, okay, you're looking out for your kid, you'll probably look out for your kid's best, for your kid's best
interest.
kind of best interests over other things. And I'm also saying, with the parents out there, I understand that 99% of parents, of people, I would say, are doing this because they've rationalized somewhere in their mind that this is for the greater good of the children. Maybe not 99. There's some really crappy people out there who have just gotten kids as accessories and or they just go through the motions. They don't put too much thought into it. But yeah, it's majority of the people. So yeah.
But I would also add too, with the parents directly, it's they know their own kids. So like, for example, my parents would get on me. Oh, you know, if they would know, okay, you're capable of getting better grades, you can push yourself harder. The parents would be in the better position to make that call. Whereas to teachers, it's just, this is one out of how many kids, unless you get to know that kid really well. Now, I went to a very small school, so it was a little easier to do that because everyone kind of knows everybody. But like one of our neighboring schools, the graduating class is like 1,000 kids now. It's like, are any of the teachers going to know the kids that well, unless that kid was like a star student or such a bad kid they stood out? It's like a lot of these kids are just going to get lost in the mix.
Yeah, and if kids are so valuable, why are people so gung-ho for a system that takes that very valuable child away from their parents? Like, shouldn't people be like, oh, this kid is so valuable, they should spend as much time with their parents? It's something in cognitive dissonance that goes on in people's minds.
Sure.
I have one more point also with the history papers thing you mentioned with the different grading thing. Did they say first of all, was it literally the same test, like you said, the same pot for the same pot of soup when in that thing that you mentioned in the culinary school? This was literally the same paper, like word for word. They were given it like in a couple of months. It was said
it was the same thing, same people, same thing, but weeks apart, and they saw a variation in that. So they were showing that there's
how did they do that? Was it higher or lower? Did the second time did they rate it higher, or did it just fluctuate all over the place?
I'd have to check. I didn't write anything in my notes. I don't think in the book they specified. I mean, I think they cite the study. If you want to look it up, I can provide a link or something. But there was a lot of variation, and again, that's where you wonder, because it's like, did they just say, whatever, I'm tired of this, easy grade, or was it, oh, I noticed something I didn't the first time, take points? So it's a little hard to say.
Thank you for listening. This has been a clip from an actual longer recording that I'll try to leave a link to on the screen or somewhere around here where you're listening to this.
Presents. 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 Presents.
Peasants.
Okay. Okay.